Well, welcome back to season 4 of What, Why, God, as we delve into the question, why go to church? Because the American church is on the decline, as people say, but the church in the world is not. So that's a good thing.
True.
So we're asking why and what can be done. And so today I have with me Kevin Porter. He's one of our student ministers here, and he's going to talk a little bit about student ministry and why it's so important for kids to come to church. So I've been doing some digging, and through the years, it's been known that a lot of kids leave church right after high school, but then they come back. And so the difference is not as many people are going to church. So right now, about 35% of kids going to church are going because their parents make them. As far as Pew Research is concerned. And about, actually 38%, 35% go because they want to go, which is actually a pretty good amount of kids. So 38% go because their parents make them, 35 go because they want to go. But the statistics show that after they leave high school, only about 1 in 3 come back to the church. Now, I mean, we won't know with this generation what that's going to look like until years ahead. In fact, with Gen Z, we still don't know because they're still in high school and college or leaving and coming back. So, so we'll see. So let's just start right there. Most people come to Christ as teenagers. I would say it's something around 70% of kids that want to, 70, 80% of people that become Christians generally make that decision as teenagers. And so we're going to talk about that, the importance of being in youth group and coming to church and what that experience is of leading youth today in the church. So let's start right there. Tell us your personal story about going to church and how that led you to become a student minister.
Yeah. So I grew up going to church myself, and I really enjoyed student ministry. I enjoyed the leaders. I enjoyed the activities. I enjoyed having friendships, all of the things that are really easy to see right there on the surface. And it's not an exaggeration to say that I got into it because I enjoyed it. And so you think, well, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I just really enjoyed that environment of spiritual learning, of spiritual experiences, of building community, all those things. But also when I've looked back at, the almost 20 years in student ministry, a lot of what I have done is really just recreating the very things that impacted me.
Yeah.
So the things that I'll have to share today are absolutely rooted in my experience that this was impactful to me. You can only really give what you have received. And so for all the things that I've read along the way that might talk about how to do ministry a particular way, really, I'm influenced very little by those things. I'm influenced greatly by, I know that this meant something to me and I'd like to give that back. And so on the one hand, you talk about that can be a limiting view of things, but the truth is this generation wants authenticity. And so if I were to try to do something different than what I have received myself and what was impactful to me myself, they would sniff that out. And in some ways, even if what I'm doing isn't exactly what they're thinking or what they would want, what they can sniff out is the authenticity that I really care about this. I really believe in this. And I'm wondering if that actually matters to them even more than the program that you might go about doing as a church that we're talking about this morning. So
Yeah. So what might someone who comes to student activities here at First Colony encounter? What are some of those things?
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of things from the deeply spiritual of the gospel all the way to just things that you might say, well, you could get that anywhere else in the world too. It's not an inherently churchy or spiritual thing. So I'll touch on a couple of them that I think are important. The spiritual side of things, I think that students want worship. Music means a lot to them. And so we try to have that as often as we can, not just on like our weekly times that we get together. They're always wanting more than we can give them, But
that's a good thing.
It's a great thing, And then the flip side, or not the flip side, but the other area is when we go on a camp or we go on a mission trip or we're about to have a retreat this fall, worship is going to be the central thing that I think students are really looking forward to. Not only because I think all generations have loved music, but it's a place where they can, I think, weed out, even in their own hearts, but they can weed out in the community that they're around. Is this real or is this not? Because if you're willing to be as expressive in a worship setting that you might not be in just a normal day-to-day setting, they can kind of tell like, oh, you really care about this God that you're singing about enough that you're willing to like behave and do things that you might find embarrassing in any other setting. I think that's really attractive for kids to see, but then it's also really freeing for them to say like, and I could do that too. I could be that open.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why worship is a huge piece of what I think students experience. Another thing that I'll flip the script that is just, it's almost a secular concept, but like we have a gym that our kids get to be in before and after our Wednesday night. That's kind of like our big group time that we get together. And we start at 7, we go an hour to 8. And within that hour, it is really intentional. There's going to be a 30-minute lesson that, you know, after a long day of learning, kids are sitting there and they're going to learn a whole lot more. That's a risk we're kind of taking there. There's going to be small groups. There's going to be worship about once a month. That's how we do it. My point is the hour that they're here, it is really spiritually focused. But they're going to show up an hour before that ever starts because the gym is open.
Yeah.
And they want to play.
Yeah.
And they're going to stay an hour after the program's over so they're here from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, even though the middle hour is the only part that's inherently spiritual.
Right.
The truth is they want this release. They want to be able to be physical with their bodies. They want to be able to just have fun with each other. And this is a place that they get to have that. And so I could go on and on about some of the potential benefits of physical activity being a part of what we do. But the most obvious one that keeps kids coming for it is they just really enjoy it. I would venture a guess, that's all it is. If we took away that physical activity and all that was available was to show up, sit down, and have that hour-long experience in the middle, I would not be surprised if we lost a quarter of the kids. I think it's just that important to their community. They have a place that they can come do that. They're loved enough that somebody created a space for them to do something that matters to them.
Yeah, because it's sports that they may not be able to do with a whole bunch of kids anywhere else. And whatever they decide they want to do, whether it's basketball or volleyball. I know my daughter at one point, she's in college now, loved when they were playing volleyball because she actually turned her ankle once. But she was more bummed about the fact that she couldn't play volleyball with everybody than she was about the ankle. But the beautiful thing about that was that when she did, everybody ran to her.
Yeah.
And they were all over her, taking care of her, you know, icing it and all that stuff. And I'll never forget that. And for her, she brought friends often. In fact, all my girls did. And they absolutely loved it. And it was like, this was not what I expected. They expected, you know, pious kids, you know, reading the Bible all day, which is not necessarily wrong. But there was some really deep, meaningful stuff. But it was also fun.
Yeah. And I'll branch off of that. You know, there's kids that are physically gifted. God has made them in such a way that they're just great athletes. You're like, man, is there a sport you couldn't do type of thing? Well, they get a chance to really be recognized and acknowledged for that in a way that, you know, if our youth group is 100 kids, that's a big group, but that's a tiny school. If you go to a school with thousands of kids, you might be gifted by God athletically and never appreciated for it. And you get to
and
come
only to do one thing.
Yes,
maybe.
because there's limited spots, right?
Yeah.
But you can come here and it's like, oh, wow, so-and-so, they're really good at these sports. And you just kind of get to see through other people's eyes how God has made you. But it goes so much beyond just athletics. You see that when a kid speaks up in class, you're like, man, every time that kid opens his mouth, he's got something smart to say. How many chances does that kid have in his other areas of life at school where he gets to regularly have the floor to share a thought and recognize, oh, the feedback I'm getting from other kids is helping me to recognize how God has uniquely made me, that I've got some intelligence here, that I understand things maybe in a way that other people don't. And so I think while there's spiritual components to that, there's also just a human component that if you're talking about why come to church, well, it's an area where your kid can really discover how God has made them to be, that you might just get lost in the shuffle. You might be an amazingly talented person in some aspect, but if you go to a massive school, you might never recognize, oh, I'm actually made, you might think the opposite, that I'm not good at that because the competition is just so fierce that I love that aspect of our youth group that kids get to shine in
Yeah.
the different ways God's made them.
Yeah, and try things out. And you said you
Yeah.
also talked about, social skills. I know we talked a little bit about some of this. There are some kids that are just naturally gifted socially and some that are not.
Yeah.
But it's really cool when you see the socially gifted bringing along the kids that may not be socially, but they learn from all of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, church has a built-in component of we're committed to each other. There's a family dynamic that comes along with being a part of a church, that when you are in your neighborhood or in your school. I was in a high school this last week. I was helping out with their Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting. So I'm walking the halls in the morning, watching all these kids pile in, and I'm realizing and remembering, oh my goodness, there are so many different types of kids here.
Yeah.
And I can remember back to being in high school myself and thinking, some of you guys I'm never going to even have a relationship with because our paths are never going to cross in the activities that we do at school. And we're so different, we're never just going to naturally connect with each other. And so I'm not going to socialize with them. I'm not going to learn the lessons that could come from having a diverse group of friends in that way. I'm not going to learn the specific lessons that that kid or that kid could teach me. When you show up to church, all of those same diverse social dynamics are at play, but you have this inherently built-in value but we're family. And so I'm going to talk to you and I'm not going to have the choice even to not interact with you. You could, and that does happen. Nobody's perfect when we show up here, but there's so many more moments where you end up talking to somebody you just never would have been friends with.
Yeah.
And I've seen other adults that have come and like been guest speakers or guest worship leaders. They've mentioned this. I've had students that have come with friends that what they will say about the group is, oh, you guys are so different.
Yeah.
But everybody kind of gets along with each other. And like it's not something they were expecting to see. And to me, I think it's a huge value of coming to church because while we're imperfect, I don't know of another place where you can be accepted for who you are as well as you can within the church.
Yeah.
So you can tell your stories of how that didn't happen, and that's genuinely painful. But you would also be begged the question, okay, so where is it happening?
Where is it happening?
Elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've just noticed it happens here. I'm seeing it with my own eyes, and I love that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the sign of a healthy church. If you are lifting each other up and if there are issues or concerns that you're dealing with them in the moment. And actually, that's a learning experience too. I mean, especially for kids, if they have a disagreement about something, that you guys can come together and actually deal with it instead of where in the world, it's like, well, I'm never going to be that person's friend again, or I'm not going to do this. No, here we try to deal with that sort of situation. I mean, it's biblical. It's what God says is, to leave your offering at the table and deal with the problem you might have with your brother before you come and give to God. So I love that. And I was thinking about some of the kids. I was a producer here for some time and used teenagers all the time. And now more than a few of them are actually in the field where they would have never thought that this is something that they could do. But because they're given lots of opportunities to do lots of things. I mean, the youth group help with communion sometimes. They serve, they will prep, they will pick up you guys, they washed cars this summer.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
of
all sorts of really cool things that the church community can do for others. We help with people's houses and stuff like that. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the role. We talked about kids, at the very beginning, I mentioned kids who come to church because the parents bring them and that sort of stuff. So let's talk about the role of parents in bringing kids to church. And I always think of Proverbs 22:6, train them up in the way that they will go so they will not depart from it. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. The main thing that has driven my thoughts about those conversations where a parent is asking, do I force my kid to come? They said something the other day that made me think, I don't know if they really want to be here. And there's a genuine fear there of, am I going to mess something up in raising my kid if I force them to do something? And I think it's nuanced. The big picture for me is the role that a parent plays in their kid is they don't get to control what type of adult they become, but they do get to really show them for 18 years, is kind of how it is in our culture. They get to show them, this is what I think matters in life.
Yeah.
And I think there is a way to say, hey, it's my job to show you that. And so we're going to church. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in Jesus. You don't have to do all the things that a mature Christian does. But I'm at least going to take you because it's my job to show you what I think matters, you know?
Mhm.
The flip side of that, to help round the argument out, is, people are saying, but what if one of the things that I value is choosing to follow God on your own? Shouldn't I be modeling that? And what I would say is, I totally understand how that might lead someone to say, I don't want to force my kid to go to church. In my experience, plenty of kids they're going to make that choice on their own, whether you bring them or don't. I don't think you bringing them is the thing that changes their decision to do it on their own or not. And what you can even tell your kid, especially when they get to their high school years, if they're really struggling with faith and you could tell, I don't think they would want to be here if it was their own choice, I would overtly tell them, say, hey, we're going to come to church, but I want you to know, I know that this isn't something that you're believing in. When you get out of the house and you are an adult and you're doing things on your own, like, you can make that choice of what you want to do with church or not. But this is a part of what our family does. And so I think that there's a way to go about that where a kid doesn't feel pressured in faith. They just recognize, okay, my mom and dad are showing me what matters. In the same way that we don't let our kids decide whether they go to school or not.
Yeah.
It's no different of a value.
Yeah.
Every kid that I've ever spoken to, if they were given that choice, they ain't going every single day. But we say, no, I want you to see what I think matters in life.
Yeah.
Education is one of those.
Yeah.
And so you're going to go.
Yeah.
You don't have to like it. You just have to go, and you have to play by the rules of while you're there. And when you get out of the house, you don't have to go to college. You don't have to go to graduate school if you're done with education. I think it's the same thing with any value. Sometimes we're just, I think, irrationally afraid that spirituality is somehow different than these other things that we're trying to instill values in our kids.
Yeah. And in fact, I think it's even more important that if you really do believe, why wouldn't you want to bring your kid? And again, yeah, you're right. Every kid makes their own decision eventually, but it's definitely, if that's a value, then they need to understand that that's a value.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that. So talk to me a little bit about Delta. You have other Teens Matter to God, and obviously to the church. And so you also have this great group called Delta. Tell me a little about that.
Yeah, so Delta it's a program. It's a once a month activity where we meet at somebody else's house. And without going into the deep details, we basically have a time of worship, a time of listening to God. A lot of times when they come,
meditation.
A lot of times even when they come to church and do stuff with me, there's a lesson, there's discussion questions. It's not a whole lot of silence. It's a whole lot of hearing what other people have to say. And so we try to pause and we just say, if we think that God actually wants to interact with us and speak to us, well, let's just pause and listen, and let's just notice what thoughts come to our mind. And so we'll do that for a while. And then a variety of kids will end up sharing, hey, this is what kind of came to my mind during that time. And inevitably, every single month that we've done this, there will be something that a kid will say, they'll be like, wow, that's really, really significant to our group, to an individual, to themselves. And you just have to grapple with, well, was that God speaking to them or not? I don't actually have anything that I could persuade another person that was God speaking to them. All I know is that it's hard to think that it wasn't God speaking to them. And you got to just lean on one side or the other. And I'm choosing to lean on the side that God is speaking to us. And so we created this because there's a variety of kids that will get through their high school time and they'll get to college and they'll be like, how come nobody told me this? How come nobody brought this subject up? How come nobody told me that there was more to your relationship with God? And they can almost be a little bit bitter that they got a kiddie version of faith, even in high school, right? And so we said, well, we can't really change what we do on a weekly basis because those things are necessary building blocks to bring people up in the faith. But there are kids that get to a place where they're ready for more than what they're going to get on a Sunday or Wednesday.
That's awesome.
And so I said, if you want more, let's get together and we're going to explore what that looks like. It started out, this was probably 7-8 years ago. It started out with, I think, like 15 kids that were in high school. And I thought, wow, if I got 10, I was going to be excited. 10 kids that want to grow deeper in their faith. And I got 15. And as time went on, it has grown to the point where kids are wanting to give extra time to go deeper in their faith. We don't sit around and just play games. There's no gym time, for example, where they can just come because they love volleyball or whatever it is.
Right.
They know that when they show up, this is purely we're digging deeper into who God is and what he wants to say to us. And going for that more is the key word for me that there is in a relationship with God. It has been so attractive that we have gone from 15 kids to 45 high schoolers. We have maybe 60 high schoolers total in our group. So it's the type of thing where they're coming because they want that extra.
Yeah.
And I try to, like, in some
That's
ways
awesome.
discourage them to sign up. I said, hey, if you are coming just because your friends are coming, that's not the reason to do this. And it's almost like,
That's awesome.
it's almost like they're hearing that and being like inspired by it. You're like, well, yeah, that's not why I'm coming. And so, like, you saying things that are, you think might turn some people away, back to the authenticity, they're like, this is real.
Yeah.
If he's telling me not to come for a bad reason, that's touching on this desire for something authentic.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been a big reason of why kids have thought, oh, maybe there's something here for me, and they keep coming back for. So it's been my favorite thing I've ever gotten to do in student ministry.
Yeah. And didn't you say you had a situation once where a kid, you had a feeling that one of them is going to become a youth minister?
Oh, yeah.
And then other friends had the exact same.
Yes. So it was a listening experience, just like I'm describing. And I told all the kids to go off and just listen, right? Listen by yourself. Then you're going to get together and you're going to share with each other what you listen to. Then we're going to get together as a big group and we'll kind of hear some samples of what people listened. So I sent all the kids off and I realized, oh, I hadn't planned on listening myself right now. I was just leading. So I kind of sat down and I'm trying to get into the mind frame of it. And I remembered there was a kid that had come to my mind earlier in the year that I just had the thought, I think they'd be a great student minister one day. I just kind of feel like they have that heart and they have those gifts and stuff. And that's the thought that came to my mind during this listening experience. So I thought, I just need to tell them that.
Yeah.
The humor of it is that I wasn't even thinking, oh, I'm listening to God and this is what God's bringing on. I had sent the kids off to do this listening activity. Yeah. And then I'm sort of like waiting for them to be done. And this thought comes to mind like, oh yeah, I need to tell them that at the end of the night. So at the end of the night, I walked up to this kid and I said, hey, I meant to tell you this like months ago. I just think you might have what it takes to be a great student minister. And I kind of told them what it was. And they looked at me with these huge eyes. They're like, you're not going to believe what just happened. I go, please tell me. She goes, that's what I was thinking about during my time with God, is that maybe I need to go into youth ministry. And then I got together in my small group with my friends. And as we're all sharing what God had put on our hearts, I had one of my friends say, hey, I think you should get into youth ministry. And then the night is over and you come up to me and say, hey, I meant to tell you this months ago, but I think you should get into youth ministry. And now they're at ACU studying youth ministry. And so it's just an experience where they're recognizing, oh, God wants to speak to us.
Yeah.
And so they want that authentic experience that you don't get if you're not leaning into it.
Yeah, there's like that clarification, that solid answer to, is this really something that I want to do? And it's interesting how it happened in like waves.
Oh, yeah. Confirmation waves.
Confirmation waves are just wonderful, particularly if it's something you hadn't thought about a few months before.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, God just works in such fantastic ways. And, well, I was thinking about, 1 Timothy 4:12, where Paul is basically telling Timothy, don't let anybody tell you because you're young that you're not worthwhile, that you can't do these things, but instead be graceful, be loving, be kind, be helpful, be, what are some of the things he said? That your speech is good for others, that you're pure, all of these things. You just continue to be the kind of person that God wants you to be. And I would encourage anybody who is going to youth, really look up that scripture and just be reminded that you all can make a difference, as we've just seen, even in those deltas. These are kids trying to get a little further, and you can make a difference in your school. You can invite somebody to church, invite them to come, and you get a lot of kids that are getting invited, right?
We have not only, on any given Wednesday, if there's 100 kids that show up, which is kind of our average, sometimes it goes above that and sometimes below that, there's going to be at least 10 that like their families are not a part of our church because they came on the hip of a friend that said, hey, this place is worth being here. Either you're going to get to play basketball and it's really, really fun, or we talk about things that matter and it's authentic, Yeah. And the balance that I try to encourage kids when it comes to that passage of don't let anyone look down on you is there is a reality that you are going to get better and more mature at listening to God and having the confidence to follow him. So you're not where you're going to be when you're 25 or 35 or 45. I hope that you're going to grow in that, which means you should be able to look up to other people and say, what, if I can look up to them, does that mean I should look down on myself? And that's where the other half of the balance point comes is, yes, but the great equalizer is that the same God that's talking to the 45-year-old is the same God that's talking to the 15-year-old.
Yeah.
And so even though you may not be as comfortable or as adept at listening to what God is saying as the person who's been doing it 30 more years than you, it's the same God talking, and he wants to be heard. So if you knock, the door is going to be open, right? If you seek, you're going to find. He has a way of, even in our noviceness of listening, or our immaturity, or in our just being a rookie at it all, like he says, oh, like that's not a problem. I'm not a rookie. I'm really good at this stuff, and I can do that, which is why Timothy's able to hear these words. Don't let anyone look down on you just because you're young. There's reason that you might think there is, but God is the great equalizer in that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You have so much great wisdom, and I love all the things that you're doing for this church and for our youth. I think you've made a huge difference. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for letting me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got something out of it. And if your youth is looking for a place to come, they are always welcome. Kennedy and Kevin will be there waiting to say hello to them, and Elizabeth as well, and get them involved in the church. And if you don't live by here, I would really encourage you to get your youth involved and get them to have a really good, strong, firm foundation, because as Kevin has just told us, it'll grow and it'll go deeper. And that's really what you want. You want your kid to have a really strong, firm foundation. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and that you will share it with somebody who you feel really needs to hear this message today, and that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.